Welcome everyone to today's Bible study. It's exciting that we are starting on a new book, the book of Matthew. We are going to indeed dive into Matthew. There's 28 chapters to cover, but there's no telling how long you can take on a book because we take it as we are led, and there's sometimes a lot of background information that can help bring the understanding that we desire to achieve. But first things first, we are here because we want to see for ourselves and have a first-hand kind of account of what the ministry of Jesus was about and consequently the epistles. So we want to know firsthand because some people have gone on to discount the ministry of Christ on the pretext that it happened before the cross. So after the cross is what applies to us or before the cross. So I'm sure grace and truth came in a manger or it came that early. So we want to see for ourselves what is legal, what is not legal, what are works and what are not works, so that we are not deluded, we are not misled, or even better, that we guide others that have lost the way. Because there's a lot of teachings that have gone out there and people are fainting as to what to believe. And so that's why we take off time to tend to have the approach of a Bible study so that, we glean on each other's insights as to what the scriptures truly say. So the book of Matthew is a good place to start to hear the words of the Christ, because you see, the epistles are also witnesses of that which they saw and touched. So we want to go from the beginning, the genealogy, the very birth and the life of Jesus Christ. So we are better premised to start here in Matthew, being the first book, and other books will open up. Definitely, the gospel are linked, as you might know. We shall read the whole chapter 1, but allow me to take a few moments of your time to give you a bit of background information so that when we dive in, you don't get lost in the detail. You see, you can zoom out and find your way back in. Sort of like how a whale comes out of the deep and takes a breath and then dives in back again. So that you don't get bored, you don't disconnect waiting for this to end and a new book to start. No, we want to keep actively engaged, knowing where we are, knowing what we want to take out of this, knowing the emphasis that each chapter brings. I'll use a few moments, maybe 5 or so minutes, and then we'll get into the reading itself. The New Testament is a collection of 27 books, loosely four Gospels and one. The one is the book of Acts, which is an account of a continuation, so to speak, of Luke. But yes, we can loosely say that these are five Gospels, then 21 epistles, and then the book of Revelation. So that's the big picture. So 5, 21, and 1, making 27 books. The epistles can be loosely also divided as those Paul wrote to Gentile churches or believers, and then those that were written specifically to the Hebrew Christians, and their emphasis is kind of different from how other epistles are laid out. And the book of Hebrews, though it's not attributed to an author, we know that it was written by Paul, but it's one of the epistles again to the Hebrew Christians. So that is the texture. It's just a big picture thing, and those books, you can locate them. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts are the first five, and then the 13 is Romans, and then 1, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 and 2 Thessalonians, and the first and second Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Then the other epistles to the Hebrews are Hebrews itself, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1, 2, 3, John, and Jude. And then the book of Revelation standing by itself. So that is kind of a way to look at the New Testament. And so when we dive into Matthew, you know where we are at. You can come out and still find your way. And the Gospels, that is the four of which we are going to do Matthew, also stand in a class of their own, and they have a texture to them. So one might ask, when I read Matthew, I find the same things in Luke and Mark and John. So why the repetition? Couldn't they write one book which covers everything? But this is not a textbook of physics or history. This is a Bible, and it is so as it's kind of like if someone has four shirts, but until you touch the shirt, you have no idea of the texture. So when you touch the same shirt for the same guy, you might find one shirt is kind of like silk, the other is cotton, the other is polyester or acrylic or whichever material. So until you touch the fabric of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, you might not know where the emphasis is. You might think that this is a repetition of the same story, the emphasis is different. So Matthew, like we discover, presents Christ as the Messiah. Mark presents Christ as a servant. Luke presents Jesus as a son of man, which he was. And John presents the divinity side of Christ, which is the Son of God. And so there are many references to the faces of the throne of God being the lion, the ox, the face of a man, and an eagle, so as to bring out these facets of who the Christ is. Matthew corresponding to the lion, Mark to the ox, which is a servant animal, and Luke, of course, to the man, and then John the eagle, sort of the mystical side of the Christ. So you understand why we could not start from John, because the eagle has a kind of helicopter view. It's a mystical view. John starts with very deep things as to how he was in the beginning. He was the Word was with God, and the same through him all things were made. Nothing was made that was made, but by him. So he starts with very mystical things, and it's very difficult to start there. You sort of stutter when you start with, John. But if you start with the Messiah, you have the prophets backing you up that there will be a Messiah to come. And then you see his service through the book of Mark, and then you see his human side. Then you're able to perceive what, the mysteries that John now brings on board, how he was pre-existent. Indeed, you find that in the book of Matthew, there is a genealogy of Jesus, but in the book of Mark, there is no genealogy because no one cares about a servant, where they came from, which their parents. Genealogy doesn't count so much for someone who comes to just serve. And of course, now Luke also has an account of genealogy. And so to speak, also John, because now he's talking of a pre-existent Son of God. So that is the texture. You find that each book has a different emphasis. And when you get to that, you'll see that the emphasis is different for each. And of course, in terms of writing, the book of Luke was written first in terms of compilation, and the book of Mark was written next, and then Matthew, and lastly John. That is in terms of chronology, but the content is related. You'll also discover that John has about 90% content which is not in all the other gospels. And you also find that Mark has about 90% of content which is found everywhere, and then the rest of the books are evenly distributed. So you might find a story running in Matthew that you might want to reference in another gospel to get a fuller understanding. And the chances are that when you run to Mark, you'll find a fuller account. And you find almost nothing in John because even most of the parables are not there. So when we get into the detail, you find us referring to some books and coming back to Matthew, because Matthew may leave out something which Mark covers, and those loose percentages can guide you to know which way to run. But yes, that is so to help us that when we dig in and we want to find our way, we might refer to certain gospels in order to bring out the fuller meaning. So with that said, now we'll go to the book itself, so that now we touch the very fabric of Matthew and relate it to the other gospels or even the epistles and find our way. I'll invite someone who can read out for us Matthew 1, then we'll come back to it and shed more light on what we see. Yeah, there's 25 verses, so let's go all the way to verse 25 and come back to verse 1.
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab, Aminadab begot Nashon, and Nashon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot David. David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon begot Rehoboam. Rehoboam begot Abijah, and Abijah begot Asa. Asa begot Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat begot Joram, and Joram begot Uzziah. Uzziah begot Jotham. Jotham begot Ahaz, and Ahaz begot Zekiah, begot Manasseh. Manasseh begot Ammon, and Ammon begot Josiah. Josiah begot Jeconiah and his brothers before the time they were carried away to Babylon. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begot Shealtiel. Shealtiel begot Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel begot Abiad. Abiad begot Eliakim, and Eliakim begot Azor. Azor begot Zadok. Zadok begot Akim, and Akim begot Eliad. Eliad begot Eleazar. Eleazar begot Methan. Methan begot Jacob. Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham, David, are 14 generations. From David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations, and from the captivity in Babylon until the Christ are 14 generations. Now the birth of Jesus was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found child of the Holy Spirit. When Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But while he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sin. So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. Then Joseph, being aroused from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, took him his wife, and did not know her till she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Jesus.
Yes, so that is the opening chapter of Matthew. It's a preamble to things to come, but it's also loaded with all sorts of things, including names, which are so hard to read. And if you're like me, those names present a very good coffee break. That's how I used to be with the book of Numbers until I found out very specific things about those names. Yes, so before we get to the genealogy, there's that introduction, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Okay, you see, Matthew is already taking a bias to start with Abraham to David and then to Jesus Christ. So he's taking that bias, which is different from Luke, like we'll see shortly. So you begin to see, even with verse 1, the books are beginning to be different. And then it gets to the long list, which I will not read, so that my tongue doesn't stick to my palate. But, before we skip that list, I want you to notice something peculiar about the genealogy as it is presented here. So the list runs through from verse 2, from Abraham, and ends with Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Okay. This genealogy presents what is called the legal side of Christ. We know that Jesus was not born of Joseph. So, but why are they giving us this account running from Abraham up to Joseph, who we know is begotten of Jacob? So this is a typical biological line, but we know that Jesus was not born of Joseph. Okay, so we need to redeem ourselves from this list by comparing with a list in Luke, which we shall find in Luke chapter 3. We shall read just one verse, not the full account. But yes, right there in Luke also, there's an account which Luke makes. So someone read for us verse 23.
Now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, a son of Joseph, the son of Heli.
Just read the last verse so we know how now Luke runs his text. 38.
The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God.
Yeah, so there goes Luke. He runs from Heli, okay, which Heli we are going to define who Heli is, but he runs all the way to Adam. And the other side, we saw that Matthew runs from Abraham to the Christ. So you see, already we have a dilemma. But chapter 3, verse 23 is where I want us to get back to so we can untangle this. So verse 23 said, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being as was supposed. Okay? So this supposition was on a legal basis. The legal basis is what Matthew has presented, because Mary is married to Joseph, and now Christ, by supposition, is a son in that house. Okay? That is a supposition based on a legal basis. The legal basis is marriage. But that legal basis may not save us, because Christ, if he is born of man, is not a son of God. So that lineage has a challenge the way it is presented, because it falls short of qualifying Christ as a son of God, because there he is presented just legally by, if you use a modern term, would be adoption. Is the stepson in everyday language of Joseph. So a stepson, there is no legal basis for us to say is a son of God. But again, to draw deeper into that verse 23, if you have a lexicon in your spare time, you look at that verse in the original language and click on all those words, you will understand with me that the text should read, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which Joseph was the son-in-law of Heli. Okay, because in the Jewish custom, if a young man comes and takes your daughter in marriage, that child becomes your son by adoption. So the right rendering should be the son of Joseph, which was the son-in-law of Heli. Because where we read in Matthew, the verse which we shall return to shortly, says that Joseph was the son of Jacob. So it cannot be that Joseph, the same Joseph, had two fathers, Heli and Jacob, except that Heli was the father of Mary. And so the account presented here of the genealogy in Luke is tracing Jesus through Mary back to Adam. And so the account, the other side, is tracing Jesus through his supposed father all the way back to Abraham. And of course, to Abraham, you can find your way to Adam. So right there is what now will liberate us from thinking there is an error in the text, or even supposing that Heli is the other name for Jacob. No, Heli is the father-in-law of Joseph, but in the Greek, rather in Hebrew, there's no such a thing as father-in-law or grandson or grandchild. Everyone is a father, everyone is a child. And here they are saying this is the son of Heli. But if you go in your lexicon, or if you have that enabled Bible, you find that this was as of law, son of Heli. So the genealogy here in Luke is tracing Jesus back to Adam, but chasing the line of Mary, which was a daughter of Heli. But where we are at in Matthew, and we are returning there now, is an account. You see there, verse 16, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of which was born Jesus, who's called the Christ. So it is of Mary that was born Jesus, who is the Christ. But Joseph was begat by Jacob. The other side, it doesn't tell us that Heli begat Joseph. No, it says the son of, but the right rendering should be the son-in-law of Heli. So right there, we've liberated ourselves from the two texts and having a unified understanding that, yes, these are true accounts of the genealogy of Christ. There is no error in the text, but one is chasing the line of Mary to get to Christ. The other is chasing the line of Joseph, who is legally, the stepfather of the Christ. So that there is no challenge